Welcome, everyone. We're recording this event, so if you don't wish to be recorded, please stay with us, but turn off your video. We're very excited to see so many people and so many new faces, including the folks here. This is our first hybrid meeting well, we've never done a hybrid meeting, but this is our first meeting since COVID, where we've had an in-person component. We are Twin Cities Cohousing Network, an all-volunteer nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to educate the public about the benefits of cohousing. Our theme is catalyzing cohousing in Minnesota. My name is Paul Weirwine. I'm a member of TCCN's Event Circle, and I will be your MC this evening. We're really excited to have our guest speaker, Alan Ohashi, with us tonight for Twin Cities Cohousing Network's fourth event in its Meet the Professionals series. The purpose of this series is to inspire collaboration between people interested in cohousing and Minnesota housing specialists by introducing them to cohousing professionals who can show them the way. There will be updates from some local cohousing groups, as well as more information about cohousing in Minnesota following our speakers. So please stay for more information. Before I introduce tonight's special cohousing professional, Becca will quickly share what we mean by cohousing.
Well, I have a quote from Dominic Castro-Weir from Nevada City Cohousing. And besides what it says on the slide, he said, at its most basic, cohousing is simply a sustainable, democratic, and pragmatic neighborhood model, something that most Americans across the political and spectrum of geography and generations can respect, if not choose for themselves. So unquote. And also besides those things, the neighborhood design of a cohousing is physically done in such a way to encourage frequent interaction of the residents. Secondly, having a common house, supplemental to private homes designed for daily use, such as resident cooked meals several times a week. Thirdly, non-hierarchical structure and decision-making, with consensus the main means of decision-making. And finally, no shared economy. It is not a commune. It's not a source of income for the members. Those define cohousing communities. So I think there's another slide that talks about networking. Our organization is called a network, and we really do want you and our audience to connect with each other. So if you do want to share your information with someone else in the group, we're going to have a link in the chat for you to click on and respond. And you can just save it on your browser and do it later. And we'll send out the information in the coming weeks. So I think that's the general things that I had to say. And then I'll be kind of helping with the questions as we go along. So Paul, you want to introduce Alan?
Great. Becca, would you mind?
I'll shut the
Shut the
door.
door in case there's outside noise. We're at Unitarian Church in St. Paul, Minnesota, by the way, and it's really hopping tonight. So that's why we're gonna close the door here. We are just so thrilled to have this opportunity because, for one thing, we have a speaker with a great deal of experience, but also he wants to open it up for dialogue, and that's going to be our format. So let me tell you a little bit about our speaker. Alan Ohashi lives in Silver Sage Village Senior Co-Housing Community in Boulder, Colorado. He is past president and current board member of the Co-Housing Association of the United States. Alan is an author, screenwriter, and documentary filmmaker. Through the nonprofit Boulder Community Media, he works with community-based media producers, organizations, and socially responsible businesses to help them develop their content in a culturally competent manner. His own work for print and in film and video seeks to capture the nuance and complexity of self-identity and expands the wider community's understanding of our pluralistic world. His many production credits include a video series called Aging Gracefully and his most recent film, The Arapaho Covered Wagon Redux. His numerous book titles include How Co-Housing Bridges Cultural Divides and Views from Atop My Bedpan. Now, I hope Alan tells us about his latest book, but another one of his recent works is Libby Flats, a novel with a love story partially set in co-housing. Alan facilitates cultural competency training for groups in youth services, victim services, law enforcement, and co-housing groups. He helps forming co-housing groups get organized and get acquainted. He's a big believer in intentional community and what he calls accidental community. His recent article in Communities magazine highlights his journey in both, including the support he received after nearly dying from a rare disease. He loves travel, learning about the experience of others, and spending time with friends. Alan obviously wears a lot of hats in and outside of co-housing. We're so glad he's agreed to dialogue with all of us tonight, particularly about building community and bridging divides. Please join me in welcoming Alan Ohashi. So with our dialogue format, I'm going to start by just throwing out some questions for Alan. And then we're going to transition to your guys' questions, which you can raise your hand either with the reaction symbol or just raise your hand. Becca's got some questions and she'll be taking questions via chat if you want to do it that way, right, Becca?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just start here. Alan, can you tell us a little about what Silver Sage Village is and how you came to live there?
Well, Silver Sage Village is a senior co-housing community in Boulder, Colorado. It's been around since 2007. And I was, myself and my partner, Diana, we were transfer students and joined the community after it had formed. And so we really didn't have to go through all the brain damage of, picking up the tiles and the carpet colors and the appliance types or any of that kind of stuff. We just, there was just a place that's opened up, a senior community. And so we have 16 condos and currently around 28 people. And back in 2007, a guy had died and the guy's estate, Gene, they were unable to sell the place. And so, the way it was an affordable home that's in the city of Boulder, affordable housing program. And so you have to be qualified and it has to be by a lottery. And so we qualified and I was just actually laid off a job. So I didn't have any much income. Diana had retired. So we qualified during that moment for the housing program because nobody was interested or knew anything about co-housing at the time. We, won the lottery and moved in. We had just lived in a condo like 600 feet down the street. And so we moved in, it was in the dead of winter, like in December, whatever that was, 2009, 2010. I've been here ever since. But as far as how I ended up in co-housing, it's, I really didn't know anything about it when I came in. Diana knew more about it than I did. I basically knew that there were meetings and, dinners, and that was about it. But little did I realize that my whole life I had set myself up to live in this co-housing community. And I don't know if you subscribe to Communities magazine, but in the spring 2024 issue, I wrote a article called the Life in Intentional Living. And it kind of gives a chronicle of my life living in or getting ready for co-housing. But I imagine I'm looking at the pictures here. Most of you are like older Gen Xers or baby boomers. And so you're probably grew up in, I don't know if you grew up in the suburbs or if you grew up in a neighborhood where we all went to the same school. There was none of this busing and none of this sort of choicing into schools. We all went to a neighborhood school. And so I knew all the same kids all the way through school, from kindergarten through high school. And we all hung around together. So that was really, you hear the mantra now is, co-housing, building community one neighborhood at a time. Well, that's how I grew up. And so it really wasn't any kind of a new thing for me to move into a co-housing community. And then, prior to that, my family were not in the Japanese culture. Everybody is a very close-knit family, strong extended families. And I imagine the same thing happens in Minnesota, or at least I hear that is around Lutheranism. And so both sets of my grandparents lived in the same town. I had dozens of cousins, and my father's 11 siblings all lived in town. So there was no shortage of places to go and people to see. And we usually had 2 or 3 Christmases and 2 or 3 Thanksgivings. And I usually had 2 or 3 birthday parties. And those were in addition to just the one that I had with my fellow classmates. So that was also a big community building experience for myself. And then went off to college and lived in the dorms. Dorms are a lot like a co-housing community, at least mine was. We had the women on one side of the dorm at Hastings College and men on the other side of the dorm. We had a basement that conjoined with a TV room and a laundry and a kitchen and a pool table. And we were governed by a group of students who represented all the floors in the building. And we planned social activities, and we did have kind of a shared value of not getting ourselves in trouble. And so that was what we did to, kind of keep our camaraderie. All the other dorms, they had infractions all year round, women in the wrong place, been in the wrong place, drinking in the dorms, out too late, women are out too late. But my dorm, Altman Hall, we were never caught for anything. And so that was because we had this, code of silence.
Alan, in the interest of dialogue here, I'm going to ask you to do the video thing. Maybe fast forward to that time in your life when you actually came very close to dying, and what was the role that Silver Sage Village played in your recovery? If you could share a little bit of that.
Sure. In fact, Paul referenced this book, which is Views from Atop My Bedpan, Living 7 Decades Through the Healthcare Industrial Complex. Well, it's a story that I wrote basically starting out when I was dead and progresses backwards to the moment that I was conceived. And so it really kind of starts out with my life in co-housing. And I mentioned before that I didn't really know much about co-housing per se when I moved in. And I didn't really realize the importance of co-housing. I think people kind of go in sort of left-brained about it. Intellectually, they understand co-housing as, sharing and caring and shared values and, consensus decision-making and whatnot. But it's more institutional. The understanding is more institutional and more intellectual than more emotional. And so in 2013, I had actually a year-long sickness, and I remember the date, December 16th, 2013. I was taken to the emergency room, and I missed out on the community white elephant gift exchange, and found myself with this exotic lung disease, and later complicated by a septic ulcer. Ooh. And so people called, people came over, and before I knew, and I came back, was on my back 6 weeks. But when I came back to the community, all of a sudden people were bringing over tuna dishes and scalloped potato casseroles and all kinds of stuff. And one neighbor had started a collection to get cash in hand, so to defray the costs of my partner Diana for the costs of driving. The hospital is 30 miles away to see me, and then the rehab center was in Denver, like 50 miles away. And so that was that was the moment that I figured out what co-housing was about. It wasn't about meetings. It's not about sociocracy or consensus. Wasn't about who's bringing what to the common house dinners. It really isn't about we don't think you're holding up your end of the community cleanup. It really is about taking care of one another and being at one another's beckoning when the need arises. And so that was a big aha moment for myself. And so the one thing I had a really hard time getting a handle on was, how do you ask for help? Because out in the outside world, the American way is, I can do this on my own. I'm a tough guy. I don't need help from anybody. And so it's in co-housing, that's kind of tries to reinvent the American way and making it okay to ask for help and okay to be vulnerable and okay to offer help. Like, for example, my attitude adjustment was, in the outside world, someone will say, well, if you need some help, give me a call. Or if you need something, let me know and I'll see if I can do that for you. But in co-housing lingo, it's more like your battery's dead. I have cables. You're in the hospital. I'm going out to the grocery store and I'll stop by and see you on my rounds. And so there's this notion of being intentional, caring and sharing versus, I guess, non-intentional in terms of being just putting the effort out there.
That's very enlightening. We have a number of questions that are coming in, which we really appreciate. I'm going to just touch on another major area that maybe you can make the link to co-housing for us, Alan. Your work also includes facilitating training in social and cultural competency. What does a group or individual, how do they know if they're making progress in this area?
Well, you have a copy of the Summer 2023 Communities Magazine. I wrote an article called Reimagining Superman's American Way. And this is an article I talk really about cultural competency and the measures and the standards that a group or individual ought to be going through. Because like I mentioned, you remember Superman's American Way, faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, leaps tall buildings in a single bound, and fights for truth, justice, and the American way. And so Superman's American Way is bigger is better. I'm a rugged individual, one by one. I don't need your help. But co-housing really is sort of the opposite of Superman's American Way. Co-housing is trying to reinvent Superman's American Way. We're square pegs trying to pound ourselves in the round holes. And I'd say that that's the biggest challenge for outside world people, who are all of us, trying to fit into a co-housing community, co-housing world. And so what that means is each of us individually, we can't do it as a group. We're only responsible for ourselves. And so what I do is I go in with a group of people and lead them through the sort of path of unwinding the tapes in your head. So why do I have these prejudices? We all have them. Why do I have this classism? Why do I look at women differently than I do look at men? Why do I flock towards white people and not towards people who I'm uncomfortable with? And so it's a matter of becoming more self-aware of those tendencies. And then I have a series of exercises that I go through. In fact, if you get my book, True Stories of an Aging Do-Gooder, there's a second edition of this. This is an older version. I take you through, you can do it on your own. I take you through these steps and what are some practices that you can do to become more culturally competent. And it's really hard work. And so, what I look forward to is the day when I call it the grocery store standard. And so you're standing in the grocery store line, you hear an off-color joke by the guy standing behind you, and you turn around and you confront them and say, I don't appreciate that joke. I don't appreciate, or do something that is as in allyship with the store clerk who maybe fumbled around and didn't get his change right, or whatever it is. It's a matter of what do we do to take action? And it's not that hard. Like, for example, you all go to coffee, I imagine you all go to the Unitarian Church, and I imagine there are people there who you don't know. So you want to break out of your bubble and step out and become uncomfortable, sit next to someone who you've never sat next to before. Rather than asking the same person out to coffee, ask somebody else. If you have a coffee clutch, maybe you want to include a person who is unlike you to join your group. And so there's this practicing that has to take place. And so usually what happens is you go to one of these things like at a church retreat, rah, 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 sis, boom, blah, we're all happy about Jesus and God and all that stuff. But then you go back home after the weekend's over and go back into your old ways. And so what is it that you can do to keep reinforcing those positive things that you had learned and keep repeating them? Now, and also understand, I'm brown skinned. I'm an outlier in co-housing. And so my experience is a lot different. And so I have, have you ever been to one of the co-housing conferences? I know I've seen Fred at one, and in Madison, Wisconsin. But there are so few dark-skinned people in co-housing. There's a woman from the East Coast, Maryland or Virginia. We had to pay her to come in to be like an expert or a consultant, because she's in intentional community like all the rest of us. But we bring her in because she speaks from the viewpoint of a dark-skinned person, and so that to me is problematic. And so the movement itself is set up basically, I don't know if you know the demographics of the typical co-houser, but it's a baby boomer, and they're highly educated, high upper class, and 70% of the time a woman, and 85% of the time an introvert. And so that's what we're faced with. If I'm not, I think it's kind of a losing cause to try to ask diverse people to come become part of your community, because it ends up looking like, when it comes to from one of y'all, it kind of looks like it's this tokenism thing. And so I always have been an advocate of cultural brokerage. So what you would do is, I'm sure everyone knows a person of color or a diverse person. Well, engage those people first and use this notion of cultural brokerage, where you get introduced to a group of people. And it might be you end up going into a meeting in the other side of town where you're not so comfortable. Or maybe the opinion leader in the African-American community is the meat cutter down at the local bodega. Or maybe the Latino opinion leader is, the deacon over at the Catholic Church. And so you might have to go someplace besides inviting them into your place. And so if you're going to try to break down those cultural barriers, it takes a lot of work, and it takes becoming uncomfortable to be successful at it.
Oh, wow. Lot to think about there, Alan. I'm again going to invite people. Just raise your hand if you have a question you want to answer, either the reaction symbol or just raise your hand physically. And I have Becca throw out a question here, and this is from the chat.
So one question is, do you have any advice for people who are thinking about joining an existing community like you did, or who are thinking about trying to create a new intentional community? What advice would you give them?
Well, I break down co-housing based on the types of beer. In Boulder, there's lots of, we're kind of known for our microbreweries. But I break it down to like three kinds. There's like stout co-housing. And stout co-housing is like traditional co-housing, the one that was in the definition that you read, where it's, you have to have millions of dollars and 5 to 10 years of time and to develop a community. And that's really kind of the traditional co-housing. I would say that we're best at doing that. There's like 170 communities. And I would say that out of all the people in co-housing, that's where the majority, 98% of the people are in the 2% of co-housing, because A, they have the inherited wealth, they have accumulated wealth, and they have the time, because generally the typical market, target market is baby boomers and older. And so then there's that other 98% of people who think, and I'm thinking based on some of the things I'm seeing in here, everybody really likes the idea of co-housing, but who can afford to buy into it? And I would say that buying into a co-housing community is going to be pricey for you, because it's just like buying a regular house. Like here in my community, we have 30,000 square foot condos that are going for $1 million and change. And then I live in one of the community, in the affordable units, we're 800 square feet, and we're deed restricted and appreciation restricted. And ours are going for $200,000, and most people can't even afford $200,000 for housing. And so it's not just a co-housing problem. This is just a housing problem, nationally, from people who don't have houses to people who make too much money and have too many houses. And so
Yeah.
I would say there's not a shortage of housing. There's just the wrong people that are living in them.
I'm not a beer drinker, so what are your other two beers, or do they go into cider?
When I update the book, I think I'll probably make a cider category. But anyway, the other way is co-housing light. And what those are developer-driven communities. And developer-driven community would be an example like in Bloomington, Indiana. There was a guy who's heavily big into co-housing. He always comes to the conferences. He's a developer. That's what he does. He buys land, builds houses. And so what he did was leveraged his assets and bought the land, built a couple model homes. And so rather than doing the whole customization thing, it was just like if you go buy a regular spec house, well, you got this choice of 2 carpets, you have this choice of tile, you have this choice of rugs. And so while he was building the house and offering people just, okay, and you have this design or that design. So 2 designs, and they're all kind of the same. Then what the community part was that they were spending more time organizing community. So they didn't have to worry about hiring an architect or hiring a developer, or, picking out finishes or finding an interior designer. The developer was doing all that. Lauren was doing all that. They were doing stuff like community building, doing the cultural competency stuff, trying to get people oriented to moving into the place. And I was amazed. I went and consulted with them, and they had the sticks in the ground and occupied in like a year and a half. I was just totally amazed, going through all the permitting and all that stuff. And so that would be considered, but you still have to have the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal to buy a house.
And so they did have a common house.
They had a common house, but it really wasn't a common house. It was a common building that was like an outbuilding. And so they kind of converted that into their common house. It also had added a couple guest rooms in there. So they had a built-in common house for their community. And then that would be light. And then there would be what I consider to be ultralight. And that would be, I think I talked to Paul about co-housing ultralight. And then what that is that you get a group of people together and form your community before you decide where you're going to move. And there are a couple of models that kind of model that. And one is in Boston, North Boston. And they had a group of older people who owned houses, and they didn't want to leave their houses because property is so valuable in Boston, that they kind of joined themselves together and created the Beacon Hill community. And so they were just you know, kind of dispatched apart, but they all pay monthly dues, and they developed this community. I think there's like 200 or 300 people, maybe more by now. But they had common space. They met at a community center, or they met at the library, and they did various activities together. They went to shows, they went to movies, they did self-service stuff, like if you needed someone needed a ride to the doctors, they would give you a ride to the doctor. If you needed to go to the market, they would take you to the market. And it was this was like an accidental community, but in
Kind of like,
in my view, it's a co-housing community.
kind of like co-housing without walls.
It's co-housing without walls. And so that's why I think that the definition that the developers use for co-housing is so limiting. And so that's why it's, you know, if co-housing was such a great idea, everybody would be one on every block. But there isn't, because we're stuck in this definition. It has to be individual buildings. It has to be a common house. It has to have all these things. And you can still have those things by changing the definition, for example, to individual private dwellings. And so, for example, I know one of the members of the co-housing board. She lives in a big house in Berkeley. She has a private dwelling because she can lock the door from the inside and no one can get in. She has a key to it. So that, in my view, is a private dwelling. And they function like a co-housing community. They have common meals, they have common events, common activities, shared vision and values, make decisions by consensus. So in my view, that's co-housing. But there are some people in the movement that say, no, that's not co-housing. That's something else. But see, if we're going to hit the 98% of people who like co-housing but can't get into it, we have to make reinvented definitions or tweaking definitions so that co-housers can realize their dream of living in a community. So that's co-housing ultralight. And in fact, it's even, someone was talking about accidental co-housing. Have you ever watched that show, The Big Bang Theory? It was on CBS for a number of years, but it's not on anymore. But those people, those neighbors, those students were in a accidental co-housing community. They gathered at each other's houses for meals. They planned events. They planned to go to conferences. They went to movies. We went down to the comic book store, and their common area was the hallway. Every episode, they're walking up the stairs and talking on the landings, because the elevator was out for like 20 years. And so, in my view, Sheldon and Leonard and his group of people, that was an accidental co-housing community. And so I think it's a matter of thinking out of the box.
And so maybe from the whole audience, if any of you who have lived in an intentional community, what are the most surprising parts of the experience, the things that people don't tell you about? I think Adam has said when he finally had the light bulb go off, is that the people who care about you, which is kind of like Ann Zabaldo said, living next to someone who cares about you. But what other surprising things about living in a community?
Oh, just the tedium and the BS, and just the petty arguments about we can stretch that carpet for $200 instead of having to replace it, stuff like that. And or we can fix that leaky gas line in-house. We know a guy with a wrench, and we don't need to have the gas company or a plumber come in to fix stuff like that. So you end up with this kind of hubris from some members. I would say that that's one of the biggest challenges. And one of the things we were talking about is the rugged individualism part. I would say that there's some people who still don't ever get over that, and they don't want to be a team player. They'll be damned if they don't get their way. And in my place here, in fact, we're having a community dinner next in the dining room. I rent this office from the HOA. So I would say that the personality thing is there's there are weirdos in all societies. It doesn't matter where you are. Not everybody is, these pious and cooperative and collaborative people who choose co-housing. And that's actually one of the things that, if you're interested in, I talk about in this book, is really the most important thing when you start your community is get to know people more than just on the superficial level. Because, you'll, at the superficial level, it's pretty easy to get along. Oh, you like to read books? Oh, so do I. Oh, you like to take hikes? Oh, so do I. So everyone likes to do those things, right? And so, but what you really need to go and find out is, who are the extroverts? Who are the introverts? Who are the chronic overachievers? Who are the totally passive people? Who are the angry types? You just need to figure that stuff out, because if you're going to be plunking down $500,000 to buy a house, you want to be sure that you're doing so with a group of people who, you want to have as your next door neighbor.
So have you, you've professionally helped various groups build that community feeling?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that-
That's,
So how do you go about that? Are they hire you as a consultant or what?
well, so like you had Karen Gibnick come in one time, right? She does that for big bucks, right? Or tries to get big bucks for it to be a consultant. Myself, I probably dilute that because I do it for pretty much nothing. And so it's like I say, that's one of those things that I just kind of give back. I'm old, like I just turned 71, and so I'm all used up, so I gotta just keep passing on this information, and I can't just be waiting for the phone to ring and, oh, you got $1,000? Okay, I'll come. If you got a problem, I'll come have a Zoom call with you, or buy my airplane tickets and I'll come see you. And so that's what I do. I'm done trying to make a living doing this stuff.
I mean, can you talk more about the nature of the help that you provide? What it looks and feels like?
Well, like I say, you can do this yourself. Buy this book for 15 bucks. And, there's only certain things that co-housing communities do. You basically start out with a business plan. I can't help you do that. I can answer your questions about that. But you have to come up with a business plan. You have to come up with, okay, what's your community story? And because the typical mistake communities do is, oh, we just need 65 people. Well, you don't just need 65 people. You need 65 people who align with what you're trying to do. And so there's a chapter in this book about how you write your community story in 140 characters, basically a tweet. So you have to be able to have this elevator speech ready at any moment. So there's a process that I take you through to write your elevator speech and figure out who exactly do you want to find. Because you're not trying to find 600 people, you're only trying to find maybe 40 people. And so you really need to target in on who your market is. So, what people do is, oh, we went out to the farmer's market and we got 100 people sign our list. Well, then you send out emails to those 100 people, 50 were fake emails and 30 of them were fake phone numbers, and the ones that you did contact, they don't contact you back. And so it was a way, maybe you had some fun at the farmer's market, you picked up a couple of tomatoes for your efforts there. But if you're going to go to the farmer's market, have your message down so you don't get every single person who is looking for a place to live, because one of the pitches is, oh, we're sustainable and we're cheaper than regular housing, which is not really the truth in most cases. And so you want to come up with your story. And then, because you're the shakers and movers of your little group, the burning souls, then you can come up with your vision and values. That's the third thing you have to do. And so whatever that is somehow aligns with the story that you came up with. And then the fourth thing is to come up with a budget. And so if you're going to do a retrofit co-housing, that's different. Or if you're going to phase into it, like, for example, you all live someplace, and so maybe you're going to do like the Beacon Hill model and just build a community in your while you're living in your same homes, but what you do is you're deciding to get together. And so come up with your budget, whether it's to do a Coho Stout or a Coho Ultralight. So those are basically the 4 things that you have to do before you get your co-housing community together. And once, you'll have your core group of people, once you come up with this little business plan thing, then you can start, you'll have something, we're not just a group of people doing a intentional community. We're the Edina co-housing community. And this is what we stand for. It's the other thing I think is you got to come up with a name. And so you have something to talk about. Because when you go to these conferences or you go to a cocktail party or whatever, people say, "Oh, I hear you're working on an apartment building," and you say, "Oh yeah, well, we had a developer, and no, we lost our option on the land, and oh well, we had some financing in place, but then that went away." And people don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. What I want to hear about is how many people are you planning on attracting to your community, and what are they going to be like, and what are some of the activities that you're going to be doing? I want to hear about your community. I don't want to hear about how you're screwing stuff up. So this is basically just a planning process. And if you, like I say, you can do it yourself. And if you have questions, ask me.
Can you put the name of that book in the chat? Because I didn't quite get it. I still haven't quite gotten it.
All right, I'll put it in the chat. I'll put all the link where you can look at all the stuff.
Yes, I have a question. So you've been talking a lot about what happens inside the co-housing community. And I'm wondering, is it important for the strength and existence of the community to have an outside mission that everyone unites around? Or is it mostly about the inside?
I think it's mostly about both. Because like, for instance, our place, we were one of the first ones and we were just still kind of floundering around. We didn't have a common value. In fact, our common value was something like maintain our property values or some such thing. And just treat people, just be good neighbors. And so, you can, like, for example, if you had a whole co-housing community of CPAs, for example, they might have it as a common mission to provide free tax services at the homeless shelter or free tax services at the senior center. So that would be kind of a common mission or a common event that they would take out to the wider community. And so, there are some co-housing communities that have a spiritual basis, like those moshavs, and there's one in Pennsylvania and one in Berkeley. They're Jewish centered, and so those have specific spiritual values and missions involved with it, because it's also how you live inside the community and also how you interact with the outside community. So you can have spiritual bases, and so, for example, I think there are some that are predominantly LGBTQ communities. I know there's one in North Carolina, maybe Asheville, North Carolina, or Durham, North Carolina. So people do them around that. I think there's all women co-housing. I think there's you can kind of pick. The only people can really self-select are the founders, because after that, then you run into all these fair housing laws and all that kind of stuff. And so it's best and then you have to kind of let people figure out what your community is like or about. Did that answer your question about the common mission or common values?
Here's another question. Have you run into any creative financial structures that allow people that do have higher equity or generational wealth to use that financial power to help the co-housing get built?
I do know that there's a different funding model that is happening at a community in Seattle. I think it's like a LLC that owns their building, And then I think they maybe pay rent to the LLC, or they pay house payments, rent / house payments to the LLC to do to pay back the financing. So I know that's kind of Grace Kim would know about that. She's in the Seattle area. But the whole thing, the whole funding for co-housing is really, it's just kind of a financing gimmick, really, to spread the risk around from the developer. So the developer might, that's why if you have 60 people and they all chip in $1,000, because usually there's this gradation schedule. So when to buy in, you got to pay $1,000, and then 6 months or to the point where we have documents, then you have to pay another $10,000, and then when we get permitted, then you got to pay another $50,000, and so all the owners end up helping to finance the development, and so when the developer supposedly picks up most of the risk by having a guarantee with the land as part of the guarantee. So one of the other problems that I know some communities go through, and I know this is happening in New York, is this idea of selling unregistered securities. So for example, you have 50 people and they're all chipped in $2,000, then are those, and they're owners, so are those unsecured securities? And so New York says you've got to register those securities, when in fact they're not really securities, but they're interpreting them as securities. And so I know that we have one of our board members who is a lawyer, has been working with the Attorney General of New York, trying to figure out how we can clarify that better. But they're typically just bankable deals. And the problem, you hear a lot of problems. In fact, I talk about that as one of the pressure points is banks. They're used to seeing a developer come in and they have a piece of ground and they want to build 50 houses. They're not used to coming in with 50 landowners trying to get financing with various levels of credit history. So it's dependent on your individual area for how you want to finance your thing, or how you can finance your thing.
I'd like to ask a kind of a follow-up question to the one that you just answered, Alan. You've written and spoken about the potential for co-housing to bridge divides. You've also noted problems can arise due to differing levels of wealth and income among members. Please talk about that and maybe ways to mitigate pitfalls.
Yeah, and I think that's where that's really the crux of co-housing is, if you're going to have the easiest way to do it is to have co-housing units are all kind of the same size, all kind of the same price, and so therefore you'll kind of attract the same kind of person of at least of means. But for example, in our place, and then I would say most co-housings, you do have this wide range of life experiences, and I think that's one of the learning curves is how do you accept people who are different than you. And I think that really the wealthy people in my community, for example, they've had the harder time of blending in because they have, they haven't had that opportunity or those experiences of having to ask permission to paint their garage or cut down this tree or fix the pipes in the garage. They just go do it, or they just hire it out. And so as opposed to myself, I would just soon rely on my grassroots friends to help me solve these problems. And so I think there's this idea that many of my neighbors just don't have the patience for that, and they get frustrated. And so I think that it's it's almost like you see that movie Lord of the Flies, where you had the kids locked on that island or lost on that island, and it was this total chaos. Well, that's kind of like it is in co-housing communities. It's like unmonitored recess. And so you end up having a few people who are like the chronic overachievers or the natural leaders who kind of step up and, try to, do things their way. And so then when that happens, then you end up getting all this pushback from people like myself and the grassroots who, don't like that top-down approach. I'm really kind of bottom up person. And so it's a matter of, okay, how do you find that balance in between? And that's really about, when you do form your community, getting to know who those people are. And I mentioned that like 85% of co-housers are introverts. Well, the general population is more like 70 or 75%. So there's a greater percentage of introverts who, for whatever reasons, are attracted to co-housing. And so what happens is there always are a few of those extroverts who get into the community. And so what happens is they try to take over, because that's the way it is in real society. Like in Congress, I would say that there's an overabundance of extroverts in Congress. And so they're all kind of attracted to that line of work and that line of decision-making process. And in co-housing, it's a matter really of trying to rein in those tendencies. And like I said, and that transcends all people, not just people who have been privileged. So yeah, it's a balance.
Yeah,
So it's important to get to know those things before you get too deep.
yeah. I was thinking, knowing that you've made films, and how do you think film is a valuable technique for spreading a new idea like co-housing? Is it still needed in the age of TikTok and Facebook and Instagram?
Yeah, if you go to my link there, I've made 6 co-housing movies, and they're good icebreakers. I would go and do a presentation for example, at co-housing community in Denver, and they watched one of the movies and had a discussion afterwards, and then I helped them through some process things. And so it's I think there's still room for movies, because TikTok and YouTube, those are kind of in the moment, and film is I've done I don't know, over the years I probably need to update some of them, but I think they kind of get the point across. One is about my experiences, and actually they're all about all my experiences in various co-housing communities, so including an accidental community and a senior apartment complex here in Boulder.
Well, can you find another chat question? There was a question about seniors and affordability for seniors, and whether co-housing is a good solution for that. And unfortunately, like you said, the stout co-housing is expensive. And although now more and more of the cities are saying that you have to have some lower rent. If you've got a big building, you have to have a certain percent at a lower income level. And so that's going to be forced upon any group that wants to build in those cities.
Yeah, that's true. That's the way it is in Boulder, and Denver's getting to be like that, and I think the Twin Cities, that's kind of a high cost area too, and it's a conundrum. That's why I'm such an advocate for forming your community, but you don't have to live in the same place, and if you live kind of in the same general area, and I think that's building community is by far the more important than selling your house and trying to move into something else. You already live someplace, so why not cut that expense out and put your money towards having meals together and going to the movies together and having an art show together or whatever it is. But that sounds so boring. It's not flashy like a new carpet smell.
Well, actually, I would say it's time for us to, is there a burning question that someone wanted to ask and hasn't been able to ask? So now is the time to step forward and ask your question.
Any question?
Yes, I did say, there's someone in the box showed a link to the conference that's in Denver in early August. And that's well worth, especially if it's mostly geared towards forming communities or interested people, but it's pricey, it's $600 to get in the door, and then you got to buy an airplane ticket and find a place to stay and all that stuff. But I do know that there are scholarships that are available, and maybe some of the sessions are videotaped, so they're available online.
Alan, I don't mean to cut anyone off here, but Silver Sage is sited next to multi-generational wild sage co-housing community. How intentional was that, and what's the dynamic like between your two communities? How does it make a difference to you and your neighbors?
Well, if there wasn't a street that went in front of our places, it might be more interactive. But we really don't do much together other than occasional, like, for example, we're having a party over here on the 24th, and usually some people from Wild Sage come over and they have a Halloween party usually. And really the only people who participate are like my condo faces the street, faces the co-housing community over there. And the only people I really know are the neighbors that are across the street. And so they could have done better with it. They could have made an intentional walkway. They could have made there's a lot of things they could have done that would make it more porous. But we just, around here we have people who don't like kids. And so most of them, those are folks have moved away, but still, over there you go to a community meeting or community dinner, they're talking about diapers and pediatricians. Over here, the dinner conversations are about diapers and octogenarians. So we just have different standards. And so, you walk over here and you see we don't have very many people over here because they walk over here and there are all these gray-haired people and there's reading glasses all over the place and bibs on the table. So it's not really set up to be multi-generational, although it could be.
Anyone ever told you you have a rather wry wit, Alan? So kind of along that line, this most recent article that you had in Communities Magazine was an outgrowth of a conversation you had with 3 college students.
Right.
And I'm just really curious what that experience was like. What, if anything, surprised you about their questions and responses?
Well, they're all curious about the first question that you asked was how I ended up in co-housing. After out of all the, here I am, an older guy. And so I answered it pretty much like I answered to you, but it was really the first time they had all spoken to someone who wasn't their parents or who wasn't, because they're all students. And so that was really about the only experience that they had with talking to older adults. And so that was enlightening. I think they were surprised on how open the conversation was, because a couple of them said, my parents would never talk like this to me. And I think that's just sort of familiarity breeds contempt kind of a thing. So they were all pleasantly surprised. And I think they're all saying, well, now I'm not going to be so standoffish about talking to people who might be older than me. Kind of like where we were talking about people getting to know people other than themselves or different than themselves.
So I have a 2-part question here, and you've answered it to some extent, but for a community information, what is the magnet that draws people? Is it a story told in words and pictures, or something else, something more? And then, as money becomes a requirement and the nitty-gritty work begins, what keeps people from falling away?
I would say that what attracts people is the story, and the story that I'd say the main story is that's been documented is it's a hedge against loneliness. And during COVID, during COVID, I think a lot of people figured out that they took their friends and family for granted. They used to be able to just go talk to people or go to the bar or go to the coffee shop or go wherever, go to the rec center. And suddenly for 2 years, that was not the case. And so, but with co-housing, you'll read numerous accounts of how communities stuck together. Like, for example, PDX Commons in Seattle, they were built to have this column of a courtyard in between. They had balconies, and so they were able to have conversations with their neighbors and have common meals, although separate, with their neighbors. And so we were, just because we already had the community built in March, one of my neighbors, the one who's organizing the party, she was a former nurse, and she had this basically this PowerPoint presentation down, and we had it dialed in a month before any problems had really arisen. So we were had already decided we're going to close the common house, had already decided we're not going to, have common dinners, and already figured out how we were going to sort of operate a month, 2 months before the pandemic actually got entrenched. So I would say loneliness is the key thing. And I think particularly for seniors, I think that's a big selling point. But whatever you come up with, be sure that you're using a language that's suitable, that's understandable to your audience. For example, if you're trying to do a community in rural Minnesota, you might want to not talk about, sustainability and parent-teacher ratios and stuff like that. Those sound like those big city things. Rather than say sustainable, you could say stuff like energy efficient or we're cost efficient community. And rather than talking about, we have a low student teacher ratio, that kind of sounds like student union or teachers unions and big schools and all that. Well, talk about quality schools or family-based education and stuff like that. And so it's a matter of really positioning your story so it's understandable to your market. In fact, there's something in this book about talking to, because I was supposed to give this talk about how to message in Republican states, and in Lincoln, Nebraska, was supposed to do a training about that, which is collapsed into this book. And words to avoid and terms to avoid and things that you really want to create relationships is really what it's about. In fact, I would say that would be the other thing is the relationship building that takes place. And that only happens when you can get people together. So the other question had to do with the money part. And it's not unusual for people to fall away. In fact, I think this place doubled the number of people who were originally interested to who actually ended up here. In fact, even one person who had bought a house, she ended up selling it like 6 months later. So you got a lot of people who just drop out. And so that's just one of those. That's why I think it's so important just to get your core group together, build a community, and then figure out how you want to move forward. Because there's nothing more that's going to kill a deal. Because usually you're guaranteed your money back with some interest, but oftentimes it's still escrowed in the banks, and so hopefully they're not spending your money on frivolous things. The developer.
So, Alan, as you age, how do you see yourself and your role within the community changing?
Well, when this place opened up, whenever it was 17 years ago, everybody was 17 years younger. And so I think the average age back in 2007 was like 64 or 63, 64. Now it's 74. And so what happens is people die, people move. We had in the last couple of years, we had half a dozen people kind of up and leave, and they moved into a continuous care community. And so, but because of the people who can afford to buy into a place like this, we just get older people. So that's a conundrum. And so me being one of the younger ones, I moved in here in when I was in my 50s, and now I'm in my 70s, and I'm still one of the younger people. And so I am, I was talking about the people who kind of get set in their ways and they have their jobs and that's what they do. Well, it's to that point where I'm going to have to step up. And I think those 2 or 3 people we do everything kind of people are going to start dropping off. Maybe they're going to have to move. Maybe they're not going to be physically capable of doing anything anymore. Then that's when I'm going to have to step up. And I'm figuring there's going to be big changes around here within the next 3 to 5 years. But, you know, I live in one of these affordable houses. And so those were originally set up to be like starter homes. Like the idea would be a person gets into this would be their first home and sell, and then they go, you know, move into make it for a starter home for somebody else. And then I'd move into another place. But there's no way I'm going to be able to find a house unless I move into a mobile home someplace for $250,000. And so I'm thinking I'm stuck here. And so I don't have any choices, and that's okay. My house is paid for. It costs $300 for a homeowners association fee, which is, I could never get that at an independent living. So basically this is independent living with some assistance. And so it's really an ideal setup. That's why I encourage just particularly older people to form their communities, even when they're living in their own homes, because you're forming that community where you can, I got to go to the doctor and my car's not working, or got to go to the store and, you know, it's too icy out. Can you help me? And so it's creating that community that sort of is a hedge against the loneliness because of the relationships that you've built amongst yourselves.
I love that. The relationships among ourselves. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, what a way to sort of just encapsulate what co-housing stands for. Thank you, Alan.
And it's not about having a common house.
Okay, I'll take that down.
Well, on behalf of everyone in the room and on the screen, Alan, I want to thank you for your generosity in spending this time with us and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. Let's give Alan a big round of applause here.
Yes, and thanks for paying attention. And you know, I try to do these because I like to just get the story out there, which is not the same story as you're going to hear from Chuck Durrett or Katie McCammon or any of those folks. And so, if you have questions, or if you're trying to figure out your next steps, you know, give me a call. We'll have a Zoom call, and can keep you moving forward, because it can be daunting, but it doesn't have to be.
Hey,
Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Alan. Have a good rest of the evening.
Yep.
I can't read it.
Well,
I can't read. You know, we'll get you all that information. We're gonna be sending out something afterwards. So
We-
that's why I got your email.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we'll get you that information.
our discussion here relates to getting this information, and I think we're going to maybe be talking about that next. Let me just quickly check here. We are now going to have Lee talk a little bit about the board and event circle of Twin Cities Cohousing Network. Lee, would you please do that?
Howdy. Well, as a 501c3 nonprofit in Minnesota, we have a board of directors currently with the following officers. I'm the president, Lynn is a treasurer, and Becca is the secretary. Now, TCCN's governance uses the principles of sociocracy. So our organizational structure consists of a main circle called the Vision Circle, with the board members in what we call sociocratic roles. This is the parent circle from which subcircles are created. TCCN currently has only one subcircle, Events Circle. Becca's the leader. Lynn is what we call the delegate. Paul is the facilitator, and I coordinate the Meet the Professionals program in the Events Circle. We could have more people on the board, Vision Circle or Event Circle, or create more subcircles with more volunteers. By the way, if you want to know about how we practice sociocracy, you are welcome to join a circle member. Just contact one of us.
Hey, thank you, Lee. And kudos to you, Lee, for really pulling this together for us. Lynn, would you please bring us to the next topic, which is donations and volunteers?
Yes. If you are a co-housing community, those communities can donate money to our national organization, Co-Housing US, and the members get a lot of discounts and availability of programs. So for people in Minnesota, if you donate to TCCN, we become your community. And this is for Minnesotans who don't already live in co-housing, which is, of course, most of us, because we're seeking co-housing. It requires an annual gift of $60 or more to TCCN, and then you have the ability to access a library of over 200 pre-recorded event sessions that you can sort by event or topic. You also get 25% off trainings and coachings through the Co-Housing Institute, $100 off the National Co-Housing Conference in Denver. And of course, you're also help supporting TCCN and our national organization, Coho US. So you can look for details of how to donate to TCCN in an email that you'll receive in a couple of days. And even if you choose not to donate a gift of $60 or more, small gifts are very much appreciated because we are a small organization. And as Lee said, we really invite you to volunteer with us in any way that you might be inclined. We're an all-volunteer organization, and you probably have skills and talents that would be a good fit for helping us meet our mission. We have Zoom meetings once or twice a month. Each circle meets once a month, and we're a working board, so we have work in between our regular monthly meetings. And because we're a working board, there's a lot of activities that you could help us with. So contact Lee at tccoho.org for more information, and that will also be in the email that I sent to you in a few days. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
And Paul, do you want to talk about picnics?
Sure. Yeah, each year for the past few years, we've had an annual picnic. What's different this year is we're going to have one in St. Paul at Como Park and another one in Duluth on the same day. If you want to hit both, you can. These are free events, and there will be information coming out in the TCCN newsletter. You can sign up for that by just going to our website. Just Google Twin Cities Cohousing Network and you can get there. So we have some updates on local groups, groups that are working to form co-housing communities. And I'd like to start with Becca here.
Well, actually, I would give it to Nancy Hamlet.
Yeah, okay.
Because she is with a group that's actually making progress.
Thank you.
Good.
We are Twin Cities Family Cooperative. The emphasis is on raising children together, though it is by no means limited to families with children. I'm a single retired person and I'm a family, so family has broad definitions. We are also a cooperative, which means you buy a share in the cooperative, you don't buy your unit. So we're trying to do some creative things with financing to make it affordable for a wide variety of people. We're in the middle of figuring that out. So if you come join us, you can help us figure it out. But it could be based on percentage of income rather than square foot or something like that. We don't know yet. But we are in the process. We decided that it was taking too long to find land and build, and we wanted to start living together because the children are growing up. And so we're going to purchase a building. We've been looking for about 9 months at apartment buildings, and we've come upon a building that has some flexibility. It's not a standard apartment building. We've applied for a loan through a bank, and we're hoping to put an offer in by the end of the week. and talk with various families who are ready to join in that process. Whether or not they have down payment money. Some people are more comfortable with just paying monthly rent or dues or whatever we call it, because they don't have a house to sell. So we're very excited to be taking this step forward. We hope maybe to have a group of 6 or 7 families living together by the fall.
Well, thank you. That's great. My name's Becca Brackett, and besides being on the TCCN board, I'm with Cedar Co-Housing. We have 6 paid-in members, and 6 other households that are explorers for a lesser fee just to start participating. But finding land, as she said, is the main difficulty. So if anybody knows of a vacant lot that looks big enough for an apartment building of 30 units, our group would like to be more in the urban area and hopefully close to transit. Those are and energy efficient. So those are some of our story. So
Thank you, Becca. Lee?
Hello from Duluth. I'm still seeking partners to help me find a location in the Duluth region that would be suitable for senior co-housing. Currently, I am looking into the next steps that will be coming from a downtown Duluth housing report, whose conclusion is that over 2,000 housing units are feasible with current buildings and land. I'm particularly interested in adaptive reuse of office buildings. I'm also interested in creating a Northland real estate investment cooperative to finance intentional community development. If you are interested in talking to me about any of this, contact me at Coho North. I'm putting it in the chat. At gmail.com. Thanks.
Thank you, Lee. Did I miss anybody?
I don't think so.
Okay. Becca, do you want to just share about the Eco Village that's underway?
Well, Twin Cities Eco Village is a group that is going to have some land in northern Minnesota. I'm not sure the exact location, but they hope to build a community there closer to the woods and, you know, more really rural. But I think they're, you know, they still have homes in the Twin Cities. So I don't know much more about it than that, but they have a website and they say they're starting to build something this summer.
And the website would be,
I think it's Twin Cities Eco Village.
okay, or people could contact you, right?
Well, I think we have
Now,
on the
look,
Twin Cities, on our TCCN webpage, there are local groups and they're one of them.
yes,
So there's links.
they've changed their name to Minnesota Eco Village Project.
Okay.
And that's in the chat now.
That's in the chat now. And excuse me, they also have updates frequently on Facebook.
I think we have just a minute or two for any kind of questions that people might want to pose to the board. Please just jump in if you would like.
You know, our TCCN stands for Twin Cities Cohousing Network, but we are also looking into using Co-Housing Minnesota because, you know, we'd love to see the co-housing Duluth succeed and the Eco Village succeed and have people connect. And so, but the name Twin Cities makes people feel, oh, if I'm in Hackensack or, you know, Rochester, that doesn't apply to me. Well, we want to help and connect any groups that might form outstate. And in fact, some people say it's more likely to happen in a small community where there's fewer of all these rules and stuff that you've got in the Twin Cities.
Okay, we're nearing the end. I would like to again invite everyone to respond to the form that puts you on the attendee list that then gets shared with everyone who sends in the form. And that has been appearing in the chat. You can find it probably in a second or two. I've forgotten who was going to do that. I want to thank Lynn, who has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, as well as Lee and Becca. Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you guys on this event. Our evening is now complete. Let me remind you that you can all look for an email in a day or two that contains important information to encourage your continued interest in co-housing in Minnesota. You don't have to send that form in to receive that. In closing, TCCN would like to acknowledge all of our donors and volunteers who made this event possible. And finally, thank you for all coming and being a great audience. We're glad you were here and hope to see you again in the future. Good night, everyone.